Isabella Montgomery had everything money could buy: a pharmaceutical empire, a perfect reputation, and the kind of power that could save lives or destroy them. But the day she fired the man researching a cure for her own terminal illness, she discovered that some mistakes cost more than money can ever repay. Isabella Montgomery stepped out of her black Bentley at the Meridian Pharmaceuticals headquarters, her Louboutin heels clicking against marble floors that reflected her image back in perfect symmetry. At 31, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history, having inherited the pharmaceutical empire when her parents died in a private jet crash 3 years ago. The building stretched 47 floors into the Manhattan skyline, each floor generating millions in revenue from medications that kept millions of people alive. Her assistant Rachel hurried alongside her, tablet in hand, reciting the morning's agenda. Board meeting at 9 to discuss the quarterly earnings. The Alzheimer's research team wants 5 minutes to discuss their funding extension, and the hospital dedication ceremony at 3. They're naming the children's cancer wing after your parents. Isabella barely nodded, her mind already calculating profit margins and market projections. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had posted record profits for 8 consecutive quarters under her leadership. She'd streamlined operations, cut unnecessary research projects, and focused on medications with proven market demand. Her shareholders loved her. The medical community respected her. Financial magazines called her a visionary. What they didn't know was that Isabella Montgomery was dying. The diagnosis had come 6 months ago, delivered in the sterile office of Dr. Marcus Chen, her longtime physician and family friend. Huntington's disease, genetic, progressive, and ultimately fatal. The same disease that had killed her grandmother at 55, though Isabella's family had hidden that truth behind carefully crafted stories about heart problems. "How long?" Isabella had asked, her voice steady despite the tremor she'd been hiding in her left hand for months. "With current treatments, maybe 15 years, but the progression varies. Some people decline rapidly, others maintain function much longer." "What about experimental treatments, clinical trials?" Dr. Chen had hesitated. "There's promising research happening, but it's still years away from human trials. The funding for most Huntington's research is limited." Isabella had nodded, thanked him for his honesty, and walked out of his office with the same composed expression she wore to board meetings. She'd spent the following months organizing her affairs, establishing charitable foundations in her parents' names, and ensuring Meridian's continued success after her inevitable decline. She hadn't spent a single day researching her own cure. The board meeting proceeded with mechanical efficiency: profit reports, market analysis, cost reduction strategies. Isabella listened with half her attention while reviewing termination notices for underperforming departments. "The Alzheimer's Research Division is requesting a 3-year funding extension," board member Robert Sterling announced, shuffling through papers. "They're claiming breakthrough potential, but their results haven't translated to marketable treatments." Isabella glanced at the research proposal. Dr. David Martinez, head of neurological research, had been requesting increased funding for 18 months. His team was working on something called neural pathway reconstruction, experimental therapy that showed promise for degenerative brain diseases, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's. "Huntington's? What's their current burn rate?" Isabella asked. $2.8 million annually. Dr. Martinez wants to expand to $4.5 million to accelerate trials. Isabella felt the familiar tremor in her left hand and carefully placed it flat against the conference table. The research that might save her life was costing her company money it could be using for proven, profitable treatments. "Denied," she said without hesitation. "Dr. Martinez's division has 18 months to produce marketable results or face budget cuts." The board nodded approvingly. Isabella Montgomery was known for making tough decisions that prioritized shareholder value over speculative research. It's what had made Meridian so profitable under her leadership. After the meeting, Isabella found herself walking past the research floors, something she rarely did. Through glass walls, she could see scientists in white coats bent over microscopes, computer screens displaying complex molecular structures, petri dishes lined up with the careful precision of people trying to save the world one discovery at a time. She paused outside Dr. Martinez's lab. He was alone, working late despite the early hour, his desk covered with research papers and what looked like grant applications. David Martinez was maybe 40, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from years of fighting for funding while watching people die from diseases he was trying to cure. Isabella watched him for a moment, then continued to her office. 3 months later, she fired him. The decision came after another board meeting, another quarterly report, another demand for increased profitability. Dr. Martinez's research had shown promise, but no concrete results. His team was expensive, their equipment cost millions to maintain, and investors were asking questions about Meridian's commitment to practical medicine over theoretical science. Effective immediately, we're discontinuing the neural pathway reconstruction project, Isabella announced to the research board. Dr. Martinez and his team will be released, and their lab space will be converted to expand our diabetes medication production. Dr. Martinez had requested a private meeting, appearing in Isabella's office that afternoon with a folder thick with research data. Ms. Montgomery, I understand the financial pressures, but we're on the verge of something revolutionary. Neural pathway reconstruction could treat dozens of degenerative diseases. We just need more time. Isabella kept her hands carefully still, fighting the tremor that seemed to worsen when she was stressed. Dr. Martinez, I appreciate your passion, but passion doesn't generate revenue. This company has a responsibility to shareholders and to patients who need treatments available now, not theoretical cures that may never materialize. What if I told you we've had success in early animal trials? What if I told you that within 2 years we could be ready for human testing? I'd say that 2 years is a long time in pharmaceutical development, and we can't afford to chase possibilities. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his voice urgent. Ms. Montgomery, this research could help millions of people suffering from neurodegenerative diseases. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's. We're talking about conditions that rob people of their memories, their mobility, their lives. Isabella felt something twist in her chest at the mention of Huntington's, but her expression remained neutral. Dr. Martinez, I understand the humanitarian appeal, but I have a fiduciary duty to this company and its stakeholders. And what about your duty to patients? To families watching their loved ones fade away from diseases we might be able to cure? That's not how business works, Doctor. We develop treatments that can be successfully brought to market within reasonable timeframes. Your research is too speculative, too expensive, and too risky. Dr. Martinez stood up slowly, clutching his research folder. Ms. Montgomery, with respect, you're making a mistake. This research isn't just about profit margins, it's about human lives. Everything in this industry is about profit margins, Dr. Martinez. If we don't make money, we can't help anyone. And if we only focus on money, we stop being healers and start being dealers. Isabella's jaw tightened. That's enough. Security will escort you out. Your access cards will be deactivated within the hour. Dr. Martinez walked to the door, then turned back. I hope you never have to understand personally what it feels like to need a cure that doesn't exist because someone decided it wasn't profitable enough to pursue. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure until he left. Then she sat alone in her office, hands shaking uncontrollably, realizing she'd just fired the man who might have saved her life. 6 months after Dr. Martinez's termination, Isabella's symptoms had progressed significantly. The tremor in her left hand was now noticeable. She'd begun experiencing occasional confusion, and her once perfect balance had become unreliable. She'd started working from home more frequently, conducting meetings via video calls where she could control what people saw. Dr. Chen had been monitoring her progression with growing concern. Isabella, we need to discuss long-term care planning. The disease is advancing faster than we initially projected. How much faster? Instead of 15 years, we might be looking at 8 to 10, maybe less. Isabella absorbed this information with the same detached efficiency she applied to business decisions. She increased her charitable giving, updated her will, and began the process of selecting her successor at Meridian. She did not, however, reconsider her decision about the Neural Research Division. That changed the day she met Elena Santos. Isabella was leaving Dr. Chen's office after another round of tests when she literally collided with a woman in the waiting room. Isabella's balance issues caused her to stumble, and the other woman caught her arm to steady her. I'm so sorry, Isabella said, embarrassed by her clumsiness. I didn't see you there. No problem. Are you okay? The woman who'd caught her was maybe 35, with kind eyes and calloused hands that suggested she worked with them. You looked a little unsteady. I'm fine, just tired. Isabella studied the woman's face, noting the exhaustion, the worry lines, the way she held herself like someone carrying an invisible weight. Elena Santos, the woman said, extending her hand. Are you here for Dr. Chen, too? Isabella, yes, monthly checkup. Isabella rarely used her last name in public anymore, not wanting to deal with recognition. Same here, well, sort of. I'm here about my husband Miguel. He has Huntington's disease. Isabella's blood went cold. Huntington's? He was diagnosed 2 years ago. He's declining pretty rapidly. Eleanor's voice caught slightly. Dr. Chen has been great, but there's only so much he can do with current treatments. Isabella found herself sitting down next to Eleanor in the waiting room, something she never did. In her world, personal conversations with strangers simply didn't happen. How is he handling it? Some days are better than others. Miguel used to be a carpenter, built beautiful furniture with his hands. Now he can barely hold a coffee cup without shaking. Elena wiped her eyes. The worst part is watching him disappear piece by piece, you know. He'll forget conversations we had that morning or get lost walking to the corner store he's been going to for 15 years. Isabella's own tremor intensified as Elena described symptoms she recognized in herself. What about treatment options? Clinical trials? That's the frustrating part. Miguel's neurologist said there was promising research happening, but the pharmaceutical company that was doing it shut the program down about 6 months ago. Something about funding and profit margins. Elena's voice turned bitter. Apparently my husband's life isn't worth the investment. Which company? Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The researcher who was leading the project, Dr. Martinez, said they were maybe 2 years away from human trials. 2 years. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. Miguel might not have 2 years, but at least there would have been hope. Isabella felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. She excused herself, walked to her car on unsteady legs, and sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes, trying to process what she'd just learned. Dr. David Martinez, neural pathway reconstruction, 2 years from human trials. She'd killed her own hope to preserve quarterly profit margins. That evening, Isabella did something she'd never done as CEO. She researched her own company's terminated projects. The neural pathway reconstruction files were buried in archived research databases, but her executive access allowed her to pull everything. The research was extraordinary. Dr. Martinez's team had identified ways to rebuild damaged neural pathways using a combination of stem cell therapy and bioengineered proteins. Early animal trials showed not just stopped progression of degenerative diseases, but actual reversal of damage. Mice with induced Alzheimer's-like symptoms had recovered memory function. Rats with artificially damaged motor neurons had regained mobility. The research was revolutionary. It was also expensive, speculative, and at least 18 months away from FDA approval for human trials. Isabella had terminated it to boost quarterly earnings by 1.3%. She spent the next week tracking down Dr. Martinez. He'd taken a position at a small research hospital in Boston, working with a fraction of the resources he'd had at Meridian. When Isabella called his office, his assistant was polite but firm. Dr. Martinez isn't available to speak with representatives from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. This isn't about company business, it's personal. I'm sorry, but Dr. Martinez was very specific about not taking calls from his former employer. Isabella hung up and booked a flight to Boston. The research hospital where Dr. Martinez now worked was everything Meridian wasn't. Understaffed, underfunded, and filled with scientists who'd chosen purpose over profit. Isabella found Dr. Martinez in a cramped lab that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and hope. Miss Montgomery. His voice was cold when he looked up from his microscope. I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. Dr. Martinez, I need to talk to you about your research. My research? The research you terminated because it wasn't profitable enough. Isabella looked around the small lab, noting the outdated equipment, the handwritten labels, the general air of making do with inadequate resources. Your neural pathway reconstruction project. How close were you really to human trials? Why does it matter? Meridian made it clear that bottom-line results were more important than breakthrough medicine. It matters because... Isabella hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. Because I have Huntington's disease, and I think I may have just killed my only chance for a cure. Dr. Martinez's expression shifted from anger to surprise, to something that might have been pity. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. How long have you known? About my diagnosis, 6 months. About the research connection, 1 week. Isabella, can I call you Isabella? Why did you really terminate the project? Because it was expensive, speculative, and my board was pressuring me to cut costs. Isabella's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. Because I've spent 3 years proving I could run Meridian as efficiently as my parents did, and efficiency means focusing on sure things, not long shots. Even long shots that might save your life? I didn't know it might save my life when I made the decision. Dr. Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. But you did know it might save other people's lives. People like Miguel Santos. Isabella's breath caught. You know Elena? Elena Santos has been calling research hospitals across the country, begging someone to continue work on Huntington's treatments. She reached out to me last month. Dr. Martinez's voice softened. Her husband is declining rapidly. She's desperate for any hope, any possibility of treatment. Is there still hope for Miguel, for people like him? With proper funding and resources? Absolutely. The research was sound, Isabella. We were making real progress. Dr. Martinez gestured around his cramped lab. But this facility doesn't have the equipment or funding to continue work at the level needed for FDA trials. What would you need to properly continue the research? About $8 million for equipment, staff, and a 2-year trial period, plus access to Meridian's original research data and cell lines. Isabella felt her tremor intensify. $8 million. She could write that check from her personal account without affecting her lifestyle. But getting access to Meridian's proprietary research would require admitting her diagnosis to the board, explaining her connection to the terminated project, and essentially acknowledging that she'd made a decision that might have killed her. Dr. Martinez, if you had the funding and resources, how confident are you that this treatment could help Huntington's patients? Based on our animal trials? Very confident. We're not talking about stopping progression. We're talking about reversing damage, restoring function, giving people their lives back. He paused. But Isabella, even if we restart the research today, we're still looking at 18 to 24 months before human trials, and clinical trials can take years beyond that. So people who are already sick might not benefit. Some might, others. He didn't finish the sentence. Isabella understood. She might be funding research that would help future Huntington's patients while being too late to save herself. I want to fund the research, she said quietly. Isabella, that's generous, but we're talking about a massive financial commitment for something that might not help you personally. It's not about me anymore. Isabella thought about Elena Santos, about Miguel losing the ability to hold a coffee cup, about all the families she'd never met who were watching loved ones disappear from diseases that might be treatable. It's about doing what I should have done in the first place. The process of restarting the neural pathway reconstruction research took 3 months and required Isabella to navigate the most complex ethical situation of her career. She couldn't simply fund Dr. Martinez's work without explaining why to her board. She couldn't transfer Meridian's proprietary research without disclosure. She couldn't maintain her position as CEO while essentially admitting she'd made a catastrophic business decision based on incomplete information. Isabella chose transparency. She called a special board meeting and laid out everything: her diagnosis, her connection to the terminated research, and her proposal to restart the project as a joint venture between Meridian and Dr. Martinez's hospital. Let me understand this correctly, Board Chairman Robert Sterling said after Isabella finished her presentation. You're asking us to fund research for a disease you have, research you previously terminated, led by a researcher you fired. I'm asking you to fund research that could help millions of people suffering from neurodegenerative diseases, research that was terminated prematurely due to short-term profit pressure rather than scientific merit. Isabella, Sterling's voice was gentle but firm, I think your personal diagnosis may be affecting your business judgment. This is exactly the kind of emotional decision-making we try to avoid in pharmaceutical development. Is it emotional to want to fund promising medical research? It's emotional to fund research because you personally might benefit from it. Isabella looked around the conference table at faces she'd known for years, people who'd supported her leadership, who'd profited from her decisions. Robert, do you remember why my parents started this company? To develop life-saving medications. Not to develop profitable medications, to develop life-saving medications. Somewhere along the way we've forgotten that profit is supposed to enable our mission, not become our mission. The board voted to fund the research, but they also voted to remove Isabella as CEO, effective immediately. They offered her an advisory position, a generous severance package, and the respect due to someone who'd served the company faithfully. But they couldn't have a leader whose personal medical condition might influence future business decisions. Isabella accepted their decision without argument. She'd accomplished what she needed to accomplish. Dr. Martinez's research resumed 6 weeks later in a state-of-the-art facility, funded by Isabella's personal foundation. She visited the lab regularly, not as a pharmaceutical executive or a potential patient, but as someone learning to find purpose beyond profit margins. The cellular regeneration is exceeding our projections, Dr. Martinez explained during one of her visits, showing her microscopic images of neural tissue repair. We're seeing not just stopped degeneration, but actual rebuilding of damaged pathways. Isabella watched the images on the computer screen, tiny cellular structures that might represent hope for millions of people. How long until human trials? At this pace, maybe 15 months. The FDA has fast-tracked our application because of the potential impact. 15 months. Isabella's symptoms had progressed to the point where she needed assistance with balance and fine motor tasks. Her speech was occasionally slurred, and she'd begun experiencing memory gaps. 15 months might be too late for her, but it wouldn't be too late for Elena Santos's husband, Miguel. Isabella had started volunteering at a Huntington's disease support group, something she never could have done as a pharmaceutical CEO due to conflict of interest concerns. She'd met dozens of families affected by the disease, people who'd become faces rather than market demographics. "How are you feeling about the research progress?" Elena Santos asked during one group meeting. Over the months, she and Isabella had become unlikely friends, bonded by shared experience rather than shared social status. "Hopeful," Isabella said honestly. "Not necessarily for myself, but for people like Miguel, for your kids who won't have to watch this disease define their futures." Elena reached over and squeezed Isabella's hand, which was trembling noticeably despite medication. "You know, when I first heard that Meridian had restarted the research, I was so angry that they'd stopped it in the first place. But now, knowing you, understanding what it cost you personally to get it funded again, I can't imagine how hard it must have been to admit you'd made the wrong decision." "It was the first honest decision I'd made in years," Isabella replied. "For most of my career, I convinced myself that profitable decisions were automatically good decisions. It took facing my own mortality to realize that some things matter more than quarterly earnings." The first human trials for neural pathway reconstruction began 18 months after Isabella had restarted the funding. By that time, her own symptoms had progressed significantly. She needed assistance with daily tasks, her speech was frequently unclear, and her memory was becoming unreliable. But she was there the day Miguel Santos received his first experimental treatment. "Are you nervous?" Isabella asked Elena as they sat in the clinical trial waiting room. "Terrified," Elena admitted, "but also hopeful for the first time in 3 years. Whatever happens, at least we're fighting back instead of just watching the disease win." The treatment process was gradual, requiring multiple sessions over several months, but the results were undeniable. Miguel's tremors decreased, his balance improved. Most remarkably, his memory began to stabilize and even show signs of improvement. "It's working," Dr. Martinez told Isabella during a research update meeting. "Not just for Miguel, but for most of our trial participants. We're seeing measurable improvement in motor function, cognitive ability, and disease progression markers." Isabella smiled, though the expression was lopsided due to her advancing symptoms. "How soon can this be available to other patients?" "If the trials continue showing these results, we're looking at FDA approval within 2 years. This could change everything for Huntington's families." Isabella lived long enough to see the initial trial results published in the New England Journal of Medicine. She lived long enough to see Elena Santos's husband return to woodworking, creating a beautiful jewelry box for his wife to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary. She lived long enough to know that her decision to fund the research would help thousands of families avoid the devastation her own family had experienced. She didn't live long enough to benefit from the treatment herself. Isabella Montgomery died on a Tuesday morning in spring, surrounded by family and friends she'd discovered in the Huntington's community rather than the pharmaceutical boardroom. Dr. Martinez was there, along with Elena and Miguel Santos and dozens of other people whose lives had been touched by her decision to choose purpose over profit. At her funeral, Dr. Martinez spoke about the woman who'd fired him and then funded his life's work. "Isabella Montgomery taught me that it's never too late to make the right decision, even when that decision comes at great personal cost." She could have hidden her diagnosis, protected her reputation, and spent her remaining years in comfortable isolation. Instead, she chose transparency, accountability, and service to others. Elena Santos spoke about the pharmaceutical executive who'd become her closest friend. "Isabella showed me that privilege isn't about having power over others. It's about having the power to help others. She gave my husband his life back, and she gave thousands of families hope for their futures." The neural pathway reconstruction treatment that Isabella funded was approved by the FDA 14 months after her death. It became the first successful therapy for reversing neurodegeneration in Huntington's disease patients, and subsequent research extended its application to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. Isabella's foundation continued funding medical research focused on rare diseases and conditions, that pharmaceutical companies often ignore due to limited market potential. Her approach, funding based on human need rather than profit potential, became a model for ethical medical research funding. On the wall of Dr. Martinez's lab, now expanded into a world-class research facility, hangs a photograph of Isabella Montgomery. Not the polished corporate headshot from her pharmaceutical executive days, but a candid picture taken during a Huntington's support group meeting. She's smiling despite her visible symptoms, surrounded by people who became family through shared struggle rather than shared wealth. The inscription beneath the photo reads, "Isabella Montgomery, who discovered that the most profitable investment is the one that pays dividends in human dignity." Years later, when medical students tour the facility, Dr. Martinez tells them Isabella's story, about the pharmaceutical CEO who fired the researcher working on her own cure, then spent her fortune and reputation bringing him back, about the woman who learned that true success isn't measured in stock prices, but in lives saved and suffering prevented. Medicine, he tells them, is about more than developing treatments. It's about making sure those treatments reach the people who need them, regardless of their ability to pay or their market value as patients. Isabella Montgomery taught us that the highest calling in medicine isn't to be profitable, it's to be human. The students always ask the same question. Did she ever regret giving up her company, her wealth, her comfortable life to fund research that couldn't save her? Dr. Martinez always gives the same answer. I asked her that once near the end. She told me that for the first time in her life, she understood the difference between being successful and being useful. She said she'd spent years measuring her worth by what she could accumulate, and her final years measuring it by what she could give away. She died knowing that her life had counted for something bigger than profit margins. In the end, Isabella Montgomery discovered that some investments pay returns that can't be measured in dollars. They can only be measured in the lives that continue because someone chose to value human dignity over financial gain. The greatest fortune she ever accumulated wasn't in her bank account. It was in the countless people who lived because she learned almost too late that the most important wealth is the wealth we share. What do you think? Have you ever had to choose between what's profitable and what's right? Sometimes the most valuable things we can give are the things we can't afford to lose. Share your thoughts below. What would you sacrifice to save a stranger's life?